So, a little bit on the problem of technology. First, we need to understand that technology is a culturally defined concept. That within a given culture we have general concepts and general associations with the proposition of technology, what it is supposed to do, how it goes about doing it, and more to the point, what it actually is. What we would consider an example of technology and what we would not. And those cultural definitions are part of the problem. They are part of the problem regarding the difficulties that we have in instilling moral behavior, in instilling creative thinking, in instilling habitual inspiration. We have a great deal of difficulty with these things, specifically because of how our culture, how our cultural framework defines what technology is. Because much as what technology is culturally defined, so too is the concept of technology generally within a given cultural framework closely associated with the values of that society, what it holds to be valuable, where it believes hope for the future lies. It represents the area of most concerted sociological investment, and as such, our definition of technology has resulted in a grotesque de-emphasis on those aspects of human endeavor, and in particular applied human knowledge, where we might find some amelioration for our conditions. Now, I know that I'm kind of preaching to the choir in that at this point in time I'm kind of specifically addressing the English teacher in our midst. But I do find it very telling. I do find it very telling that when we discuss, particularly in the political arena, when we discuss the necessity and the imperative to improve our educational standards and educational performance, that we all but invariably add the qualifier math and science. We all but invariably tack in math and science. When we're talking about where we need to improve education, when in point of fact, compared to other areas of academic discipline, math and science is doing just fine. I think that for the sake of clarity, it's worth mentioning what I am talking about when I say we, in a kind of a metacultural context. We could be, and often would be, construed as the Western world. I personally find the term the Western world to be non-descriptive. It doesn't really communicate anything. It doesn't describe anything. It doesn't provide us specific bounds through which we could come to understand what the group that we are talking about actually is. It is a purely referential concept. It's a handy introduction to or reference to an idea if you already know what it is. If you already know what the Western world is, and you have some idea of what the Western world is, then the term the Western world is somewhat useful for you. But other than that, outside of that, it doesn't really convey or communicate anything. And one thing that we have seen very pronounced, certainly in the last 10 years, is a fair bit of debate. Controversy, and lack of consensus on where the Western world starts and stops. Is it a set of economic values? Is it a set of cultural values? Where exactly is this? Where exactly is this Western world? And so I I'd prefer to step outside the term entirely. When I talk about us, I am talking about the inheritors of the cultural the cultural continuity or sense of cultural continuity imparted by the Alexandrian conquests. That's what I mean by us. When I say the Western world, I am talking about, or where other people say the Western world, I am talking about the Aristotelian world. I am talking about, well, and very specifically, I am talking about those regions of the world that at one point in time were conquered by Alexander and were later conquered by Rome. Now, on the Alexandrian side of things, and just to kind of, we grossly underestimate the degree to which this has altered our cultural perceptions. This event, the degree to which it has formed our cultural perceptions. Much of what we generally consider to be, much of what is Aristotelian thinking, we consider to be foundational. We consider to be innate, to such a degree that we have people like, we have people like Chomsky, very, very seriously proposing that Aristotelian thought is intrinsic to self-awareness. That Aristotelian thought is intrinsic to self-awareness. That if you are self-aware, then you process, order, and prioritize information according to those, according to the imperatives outlined by Aristotle. It's that innate to our perception. Or rather, we perceive it as that innate, and as if we have no awareness of the fact that someone invented these ideas. They did not spring out of the ground. We did not breathe them in the course of human history. They are not an environmental constant. This is the codified learning and set of philosophical propositions of one man who happened to be the nursery room teacher of a man who, by force of military power, conquered much of the known world at the time. That's why we view it as innate, because these ideas were traveled on the boots of an army, and an army that won, an army that won. Now, the formalizations or even the approach to philosophical formalization that was conquered by Alexander remained to some degree, because the general motif of the Alexandrian conquest was compatibilistic. He did not superimpose his cultural priorities, economic priorities, or bureaucratic imperatives onto a society. The Alexandrian Empire was not an empire in the way that we would think of an empire. We're more accustomed to the Roman-style empire, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the Alexander's empire was largely built by encouraging his soldiers to settle down in the land that they conquered, rather than a superimposed set of cultural imperatives. Alexander just tilled an Aristotelian flavor into the soil wherever he went, and the result of this is that we see vastly differing cultures. We see vastly differing cultures that have fairly Aristotelian ideas in at least some areas. And we look to that and say, aha, see, we've got this culture over here, this culture over there. They're very, very different cultures, but they have this shared idea, so this must be something intrinsic to the human experience. No, They were just both conquered by Alexander. I mean, you know, that's we're not looking at something intrinsic. We are looking at a historical consequence of this. Much later we have the Roman style empire, and why I would again qualify when I'm talking about us. I'm talking about Alexandrian conquest and Roman conquest. The Roman style conquest was much more overt, much less syncretistic, much less compatibilistic. Roman centurions went off to war and then came home to Rome, came home to their Roman wives. You know, they did not settle down with the locals. They did not integrate. And Roman continuity of cultural power was generally maintained by force of arms, force of law, and force of commerce. But naked force in all examples. Rome was by and large not a diplomatic state. When you put these two together, we have the Aristotelian heritage, which gives us the impression that the way that we order our ideas, and that's most of what Aristotle had to say. That's most of what the Aristotelian philosophical and cultural heritage is an idea about how ideas are shaped, how they fit together, and how we should organize them. And by virtue of the peculiarity of the history by which we came to those ideas, we tend to view those as innate. And the Roman ideas, which are more concerned less with organization of ideas and more organization of power, organization of endeavor, organization of effort. And very much, again, well, it is the source from which we have derived our ideas of what an empire should be. We wind up with an attitude towards knowledge that says that first, the way that we think, both as a culture and as individuals, is somehow innately reflective of the human experience. We aren't well prepared for the idea that other people think differently than we do. And by virtue of our Roman heritage, our attitude towards perceived difference, because we view the structure of human thought and our human thought as generally innate, as somewhat intrinsic to the facts of being human. Because of that, our default response when we encounter difference is to conquer it. We view the structure of our thoughts as the default state of human thought. And if there is a difference, it is a defect. This is a direct result of our paired Aristotelian and Roman cultural inheritances.